The winter of 1878 came down hard on the high plains, the kind of winter that didn't just test a man's strength but measured the size of his soul. Snow lay heavy against the fences of Caleb Hart's ranch, piling high like the weight of every loss he'd carried since his father was buried on that same land. The wind howled through the cottonwoods, rattling the barn doors like a warning from God himself. And inside the small homestead cabin, the fire was dying faster than hope ever should. Caleb stood near the window, his shoulders broad but bent by more than labor, watching the last of his cattle huddle together against the storm. If one more blizzard came, he'd lose them. If one more debt collector rode in, he'd lose the ranch. And if one more lonely night passed without warmth in his home, he feared he might lose himself. That was the night she arrived. Her name was Eliza May Turner, though she didn't announce it like someone expecting welcome. She came on foot, coat threadbare, boots cracked, her hands red and raw from cold and work, knocking softly as if afraid to disturb a world that had already decided she didn't belong in it. When Caleb opened the door, lamplight spilled onto her face, revealing eyes steady with a courage that had no business surviving. The life she'd lived. She didn't ask for charity. She asked for work. Said she could cook, clean, mend, and keep a stove alive through the coldest night. Said she wasn't afraid of hard days or harder men, and something in the way she stood there, unbowed, unbroken, made Caleb step aside and let her in. That first night, she saved his house without saying a word about it. The fire had nearly gone out, and with it, the warmth that kept pipes from freezing and men from giving up. Eliza rolled up her sleeves, knelt before the iron stove, and worked it like it was an old friend. Her hands moved with quiet confidence, coaxing flame from dying embers, feeding it just enough wood, shielding it from drafts. The fire caught again, bright and steady, and as heat filled the room, Caleb felt something else return too, something he hadn't felt since before his father died: hope. Days turned into weeks. Eliza rose before dawn and slept after dark. She cooked meals that tasted like memory and comfort, stretched supplies that should have run out long before, and mended clothes with stitches so neat they looked like care itself woven into fabric. She never complained, never asked questions that would reopen wounds. But she listened, and when Caleb finally spoke of the bank threatening foreclosure, of the ranch slipping through his fingers no matter how hard he worked, she didn't offer pity. She offered resolve. When the storms worsened and cattle began dying on neighboring lands, Eliza suggested moving the herd early, reinforcing fences, rationing feed with precision that spoke of experience earned the hard way. Caleb trusted her instincts without knowing why. Maybe because courage recognizes courage. Maybe because love, even before it's named, knows where to place its faith. But the Wild West never gives without demanding payment. Word spread fast that Caleb Hart was close to losing everything, and vultures circled. A rival rancher, Silas Boone, came riding in with a smile sharp enough to cut, offering to buy the land cheap before the bank took it. When Caleb refused, Silas's eyes flicked toward Eliza in a way that made her spine stiffen. She knew that look. She'd seen it before in men who believed survival made them entitled to whatever they wanted. That night, as the wind screamed outside, Eliza stayed awake long after Caleb slept, feeding the stove, guarding the home, and wondering how far her courage would have to stretch before this winter was over. She didn't know yet that her hands wouldn't just save a fire. They would save a ranch, and the man who stood on it. Spring did not arrive gently on the Hart Ranch. It crept in like a wary animal, testing the ground before trusting it. Snow melted into thick mud, fences leaned like tired men, and the land revealed every scar winter had carved into it. Caleb worked from first light until the stars returned, driven not just by desperation now, but by something steadier growing in his chest. Eliza. She had become the quiet center of the ranch, the constant warmth even when the stove was cold. And though neither of them spoke of it, their lives had begun to weave together as naturally as breath. Yet peace in the West was always borrowed, and debts, whether owed to banks or to men, were always collected. Silas Boone returned with a thaw, riding in with 2 hired guns and a confidence that said time was on his side. The banknote would come due within weeks. Caleb stood tall when Silas dismounted, but Eliza saw the tension in his jaw, the way his hands curled slowly into fists. Silas made his offer again, sweeter words wrapped around poison, and when Caleb refused once more, the threat beneath the smile surfaced. Accidents happen, Silas said. Fires started. Cattle wandered off cliffs. Eliza stepped forward then, her voice calm but unyielding, and told Silas Boone he would leave their land. The men laughed, but something in her eyes unsettled them. Courage has a way of doing that. It reminds bullies that fear is not the same as power. That night, Eliza told Caleb the truth of her past. She had grown up on a small homestead like his, learned to tend fires in fields before she learned to read. When her parents died, the land was stolen by men who knew the law favored those with money and guns. She had worked kitchens, camps, and ranches ever since, watching men lose everything because no one stood with them when it mattered most. She swore she would never let that happen again if she had breath in her body. Caleb listened in silence, understanding dawning slowly. Eliza wasn't just surviving. She was fighting back against a world that took too much. When the bank agent finally arrived, Eliza had already set her plan in motion. She'd sent word to neighboring ranchers, men and women she'd helped during the winter with food, warmth, and labor. On the day judgment was expected, they rode in, not with guns drawn, but with witnesses, contracts, and proof of Silas Boone's crooked dealings. Eliza stood beside Caleb as the truth spilled into the open, her hands steady, her voice unshaken. The bank backed down. Boone rode away ruined, his power broken not by violence, but by courage and community. As the dust settled, Caleb realized something deeper than relief had taken root. Eliza had not only saved his ranch, she had restored his faith in what could be built when two people chose to stand together. That evening, as the stove crackled softly and the sun dipped low over land that was finally secure, Caleb reached for her hand. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like something to fear. But the West never ends its stories quietly. One final test still waited on the horizon, one that would demand everything. Eliza and Caleb had learned about love, sacrifice, and the cost of holding on.